Hello everybody, this is T.A.R.D.I.S, and welcome back. For today's episode, I will be talking about how the Doctor Who series does horror, especially survival horror, better than almost everybody out there. For those of you who do not know much about Doctor Who, allow me to give you a brief summary of the series. And in case I forgot some detail, feel free to ask me a question in the comment box below, or on my Facebook account, TROA_OOS, with this picture on. Doctor Who is a British science fiction series that first started off in 1963. Yeah. The series is 52 years old as of this recording, and it's still awesome. The story revolves around an alien known only as the Doctor who can travel through time and space in his TARDIS, which is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside and looks like a police box, and is usually accompanied by some companions. The series was cancelled back in 1989 and was successfully resurrected in 2010, so the series has been running for so long that they had to create an ability for the Doctor to be played by different actors when the existing actor had moved on to other projects or died in real life. So the creative writers came up with the ability for the Gallifreyans that were turned into Time Lords, the ability to regenerate when near death, and their entire body's cells could rearrange themselves and heal any wound. The Doctor would also have his physical and psychological aspects changed, and he could turn into any species that has existed or ever will exist in time and space. But for some reason he just keeps going back as a human or a Time Lord. Sounds like lazy writing to me. So essentially the Doctor is still the same person, just sometimes displays traits that become more dominant than the previous one. For example, sometimes he can be willing to take a life, but only if it's the last resort, while other times he can be a complete and total pacifist and reject all acts of violence. While the series has had a long-running history, it hasn't usually had a big budget to back up its special effects like its creatures, ships, and settings. Because of that, the series has had to think up creative ways in order to sell people on the idea of their monsters looking awesome, scary, or a combination of the two. While the classic series had special effects and costumes that would be laughed at today, it was the best they could do at the time, mostly. But the current series still likes to use practical effects over CG, which is always a plus in my book. Not to say CG doesn't have its place, but I just prefer something that is actually there and that you can interact with over something that is just computer generated. So because of their limitations, they have had to learn the art of proper lighting, camera angles, mood, and judicious editing to make their series work. As some examples today, we are going to talk about 4 different kinds of Doctor Who creatures today. 2 have become very famous and returning creatures in the later stories. These are all going to be from the 2010 to the present series, so I'm going to be using the creatures because as of so far I haven't found any scary creatures in the classic series, which I have been sifting through in chronological order on DVDs through Netflix, and am only now up to the 8th season. The 2nd season introduces the sonic screwdriver, and the 7th season introduced color into the franchise. And no, for those of you who are going to complain that I didn't put the Daleks or the Cybermen on this list, I don't find them scary in any of their incarnations, so they do not count. Also, I don't find the Pigmen scary because every time I see them on screen, I'm just expecting Toowoomba to come out of nowhere and whack them with his blackjack. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the 4 creatures I mentioned earlier. The first is going to be the Empty Child from the first season's 9th episode, with the 9th Doctor in the 2005 episode called The Empty Child. This right here is a great example of how to turn something odd into something extremely creepy and scary with all just the proper use of lighting, directing, tone, camera angles, and dialogue. All this creature really is, if you just take a quick look at it, is a child with a gas mask on his face, a scar on his hand, wearing pajamas, and saying things like "mommy" and "Are you my mommy?" That's it, folks. But with dark lighting, our natural unease of things behind masks that hide their true intent, creepy music, and the child's ability to talk through anything with a speaker and to pass on the so-called virus with just a touch and eventually into the air is what makes him quite terrifying. The fact that the first infected one has super strength, which I would theorize that the other infected ones have, is just icing on an already delicious cake. Couple that with being set in World War II during the Blitz on London at night, just to add add our human fear of the dark on top of everything else, just an even more terrifying aspect that you could die at any given time to all the residents of this place. Makes these scenes even more creepier for it because all the streets are abandoned and there are no sounds but the occasional dog barking or bomb dropping. Just makes the town feel so empty but still creepy because you can swear you can feel somebody watching you from somewhere in the dark the whole time. And it just puts you on edge and makes you very uncomfortable. Speaking of the darkness, and as the Doctor states that almost all creatures in the universe seem to have an apparent fear for the dark, let's move on to our next contestant, the Vashta Narada. This terrifying new enemy comes to us in Season 4's 2008 10th episode featuring the 10th Doctor in the episode titled Silence in the Library. This episode plays on our fears of the dark and what we can't see can still hurt us. The Vashta Narada are microscopic carnivorous beings who, as the 10th Doctor puts it, some of the dust specks visible in bright sunlight are single Vashta Narada, or small swarms, but they're not large enough to be a threat to most life, but in large numbers they could strip a creature to its bare bones in milliseconds. They aren't usually a threat, but in the episode Silence in the Library, their entire home was destroyed, and all the humans on the planet, 4,022 to be exact, they considered as meat, so the computer saved them. But that's getting into something I don't really want to bring up here. They're extremely smart and adaptive, and like to get close to attacking their target by mimicking their shadow and then eating them alive. Hell, in the episode Silence in the Library, they eventually get smart enough to eat through spacesuits, eat the person inside of them, use the suit and skeleton to move around outside the darkness, and eventually learn how to speak and negotiate with us through the suit's universal translator. And these are only microscopic organisms, I remind you. They're scary enough for just the simple fact that if you go into the darkness or step into a shadow, it could be a Vashta Narada, and they could kill you in the amount of time it would take you to blink. Add to that their ability to move the dead bodies around inside spacesuits, and their movement being very zombie-like, just helps make them scary, and their movement falls right into the uncanny valley that I talked about last episode. Which, if you look at this episode from an outsider looking in, it just looks like the Doctor and company are all trying to run away from the shadows and darkness. I would make that sound like a Shyamalan plot twist, but it already was, and it was made into a movie. It's called The Happening, and that movie sucked. The difference is the main characters in the movie are running away from wind, and in the Doctor Who episode, and the Doctor and company are running away from darkness. But let's get real here. The reason the Doctor Who series does it so much better than Shyamalan and doesn't turn it into a joke, the people making the series understand what music, dialogue, environment, and lighting can do to set a mood and tone with it, and know how to make a compelling episode and enemies with it, which I hope by the end of this episode you will hopefully agree with, or at least see where I'm coming from on all this. Plus, the directors of the Doctor Who franchise seem to have a pretty good understanding of what people are easily afraid of and how to exploit it to their maximum potential. If you told me that several of the directors or the writers had some major studies in psychology, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Speaking of things moving when you can't see them and killing you in less than a blink of an eye, let's move on to our next widely loved horror monster that the 10th Doctor also had to deal with: The Weeping Angels. Introduced in 2007's third season's episode 11 called Blink, it gave us the first terrifying look at the Weeping Angels. After that episode was aired, they were so well received by the audience that the series decided to make them not just one-off monsters like the other two, so they put them in future episodes with much more terrifying and praised results. For my episode today, we will draw on mostly the two-parter, The Time of Angels, and Of Flesh and Stone. The reason I'm not going to be citing later episodes will get explained more in just a bit. The Weeping Angels at first only appear to be stone statues that are completely harmless, but if you do so much as blink, your life could be altered radically or even killed. It was first established in the episode Blink that the Weeping Angels prefer to feed by creating time paradoxes just by touching you and sending you back in time. In that episode, it was established that the Weeping Angels, as the Doctor puts it, are as old as the universe, or very nearly, but no one really knows where they come from. He also adds that they are the deadliest, most powerful, most malevolent life forms ever produced. As the Doctor would put it, they are faster and stronger than you could imagine. Don't blink. Blink and you're dead. Which is an odd statement, as seeing the Doctor also says that they don't usually kill you, they just send you back in time and feed off your potential energy of the years you would have lived had they not sent you back in time. It is stated that the angels exist as a quantum lock species, which means they can only move when no one can see them, because if you look at them, they immediately become stone statues. They only look like they are weeping so that they don't wind up looking into each other's eyes and becoming frozen in stone until some outside force moves them apart. Later, in the aforementioned episodes, it is found out that nobody has ever taken or drawn a picture of an angel, because any image that holds an angel becomes in itself a weeping angel. Do I really need to tell you why these things are frightening beyond belief? They can move across a room in the time it takes you to blink, they're virtually indestructible, can almost live forever, can drain power from things like batteries or light sources, just for example, and have almost seemingly limitless strength. But you want to know the scariest part of all is, in all the episodes I've mentioned thus far, the Doctor and company have never had to deal with a weeping angel at full power. And once again, they managed to, just by using their money to make a lot of different stone statues in the rooms, and playing red light, green light with the lights, and using all the other things I talked about earlier, they created another frightening monster. But enough about the dark. Let's talk about our last but ironically not forgotten last religious organization of monsters known as the Silence. The Silence is the name of the religious organization genetically engineered priests known as Silence, and as a reminder to everybody, I have only made it up to the end of the Silence arc in the most recent series, which is why I also didn't mention any other episodes about the Weeping Angels from earlier. The Silence first appears in 2010 in episode 1 of season 6 with the 11th Doctor, this time in the episode called The Impossible Astronaut. The Silence has the power to make you forget anything once you look away from them, including the creatures themselves, and they cannot be photographed. So, for example, if you see a bomb being turned on by the monsters and you turn around to run out of the room and warn people about it, as soon as you turn around, you'll forget everything you just saw and think that you must have been done with that room and walk away without any knowledge of the bomb or the room's occupants. They also have the power to leave post-hypnotic suggestions, which they have used to subtly influence and control humankind's interests and ideas over the years. When the Doctor first finds out about them, he assumes they're an invading force, but then the Silence corrects him and says that they have been on this planet since humanity's beginning. So just think about it. These creatures could walk into a room, kill everyone in that room, and walk out the front door, and nobody would remember them. As the Doctor explains in one of his theories to his companions about how many and where they might be, he asks, have you ever swear that you've seen something out of the corner of your eye, but then you turn and it isn't there? Or have you ever walked into a room and forgot why you came in that particular room or what you were looking for? He theorizes that it could have had one of the Silence in it, and when you looked away, you simply forgot. They could be everywhere, and you would never know it. They could be living in your house right now, and you wouldn't know it. The reason this enemy is scary isn't so much because of what they look like, but because of their ability, making you question just how many decisions in the world have they influenced and how much in control of your life you really are. In the series, the Doctor even suggests that they are responsible for making humankind want to go to the moon. Kind of chilling, isn't it? To know that all the horrible and good things that have happened in human history could have been just because that's the way they wanted it to happen. They're like Marvel's Hydra, but so much harder to catch and look for. Looking at them just from a monster point of view, they're supposed to be scary, but they just look like, to me, like the Men in Black wearing some cheap-looking masks and hands. I mean, come on. Every time I look at their faces, it makes me think of a melted Voldemort mask. Oh, and I also forgot to mention that they can throw force lightning and fry you in case you try to run away or attack them. So yeah, apparently they're Sith Lords on top of it. Now before I go, I know the internet has tried to pit who would win in a death battle, the Silence or the Weeping Angels, but I would like to throw my hat into the ring and ask for it to be a three-way battle between the Silence, the Weeping Angels, and the Vashta Nerada. And yes, I know that all three of them don't normally kill people unless they have to, but let's just contrive some reason for them to fight, shall we? Like maybe the Silence sees the Weeping Angels as a threat and tries to get everybody to destroy all the statues in the world. They are also wanting to destroy more trees so they can start building some kind of doomsday machine or something. I don't know. I'm literally just making this up as I type. But because they hear about the statues getting destroyed, the Weeping Angels start trying to hide in the forests, which are being watched over by the Silence in case any Weeping Angels try to flee into them. Then the Vashta Nerada are like, sweet, look at all this free food coming into our, for some reason now, diminishing home. Screw it, let's eat. Doesn't that sound like a good proposal, people? Because it sounds like a good idea to me. So, I don't know, somebody go out there and write this. Hopefully I've seeded in you an interest to go watch Doctor Who, or at the very least, see if you agree with the monsters being scary. You don't have to be a longtime Doctor Who fan to enjoy the new series. Hell, personally, I have never heard of the Doctor until the resurrection of the series in 2010, and that's where I started off, with no knowledge of the previous series, and I still enjoy it. You can even just go watch the episodes I mentioned earlier in no particular order, and they would still be enjoyable without knowing the overarching story. Though knowing the overarching story does make the episodes better, but they're not essential. So go watch the episodes, or even the series, and tell me what you think. It gets my personal recommendation seal, so go. Watch it. Do it! Do it now! And with that, I'm going to bring this episode to the end. If you like what you saw, please remember to like, favorite, and subscribe. Share this with your friends or enemies. If you have any suggestions for the show, please leave them in the comment box below. But don't just send me Let's Plays or links to other people's channels. I don't like spam. As promised, my next episode will be about how Samurai Jack does Show Don't Tell awesomely. I am still working on my MK versus DCU Pondering Theories episode, so please be patient for that. I am also thinking about doing an episode on if Kickstarter existed back in the 80s and 90s, which series, mostly anime, would have been able to use it to get their series finished. If you have any suggestions about which series I should talk about, please leave them in the comment box below. Just don't use Inuyasha or Neon Genesis Evangelion, because let's face it, they already were kickstarted to be able to get their series finished, and still are. So until next time, I'll see you on the next Pondering Theories. Goodbye!